Doncic a move, got the screen, the collision into DiVincenzo. Another rebound by Gobert. Conley ahead, Edwards will float and get 2 more, and the lead is up to 6.
Luka Doncic literally cannot play basketball without arguing with the refs. I'll go as far as to call it an addiction. And since I've watched Luka bark at the refs for over a decade now, that is from all the way back when he was a teenager with Real Madrid to 7 years in Dallas and now with the Lakers, I guess it's time we address his biggest vice that is getting in his own way and at this point seems unfixable. Let me remind you that just last year, Luka Doncic led the league with 19 technical fouls. The narrative that Luka has to restructure his priorities and focus more on D rather than the refs was loud. This year, he's only at 14. Talk about a bit of an improvement, right? Well, no, because at the same time, Luka missed out on a good chunk of the regular season when he was with Dallas and actually played 20 games fewer this season. Plus, now that he's in LA and is playing for arguably the most prestigious franchise in NBA history, there's a good chance the refs are giving him more leeway and are giving less techs anyways. Because if you watched even a few Lakers games this season, you know that Luka doesn't just occasionally talk to the refs, he barely ever stops. And here's the thing, the more important the game, the worse it gets. Luka's obsession with the refs seems to be directly tied to pressure. In the regular season, he might moan a bit. In the playoffs, he's locked in and is barking at every call or no call he deems unfavorable. The higher the stakes, the more he fights the officials, and now that the Lakers are out of the playoffs, it was clear it got progressively worse. Game 2 against the Wolves summed it up perfectly. I'll keep it real, there were definitely some bad calls in a few cases and Luka was absolutely right to call it out, but it really went both ways. The refs weren't always up to the task and there were missed or questionable calls for both teams. Yet none of the players on the floor were as visibly or consistently frustrated as Luka. Every whistle or lack of one seemed personal, almost as if when he thinks something's unfair, he doesn't just react but obsesses over it. Talking to the refs during dead balls, during plays, after plays, and I believe it negatively affects his game. For instance, one of those examples from Game 2. About 6 minutes before the end of the 4th quarter, Luka got into this lengthy argument with the refs, and from that moment forward, his production fell off a cliff. He shot just 1 for 4 from the field and turned the ball over once. In a tight playoff game, those final minutes matter more than ever. And instead of being mentally locked in, Luka's focus drifted to things he couldn't control. When the Lakers needed his leadership, his head was somewhere else. Now let's rewind to last year's NBA Finals where we saw yet another chapter of the same story. During Game 3 versus Boston, the Mavs were in the middle of a 20-2 run. They had seized momentum and the energy had shifted in their favor with just 4 minutes to go in a high-stakes, closely contested game. And then Luka fouled out.
Brown runs into Doncic, blocking foul, and that's it, he's fouled out.
While the box score might indicate just poor defense on his end, anyone who actually watched the game knows it wasn't just about the fouls. It was about his energy, his mindset, and his total lack of composure. His frustration had been building for minutes, his body language told the story, and once again he was focused on arguing calls instead of helping his team close the game. He just wasn't mentally in the moment, letting himself get consumed by officiating, which cost the Mavs dearly. That's not just a bad game, that's a pattern, one that keeps showing up when the lights are brightest and the stakes are highest. Now, this isn't new, and it's not just the NBA. It's been the same story in international play too. In fact, it's often even worse. When Luka represents Slovenia, he becomes even more emotional and intense. The pressure of leading his country clearly weighs on him. For example, in the 2023 FIBA World Cup quarterfinal, he completely lost his cool. He got ejected in a win or go home game against Canada, letting his teammates down in the process.
I think everybody knows what my frustration was. Playing for a national team, it's a lot of emotions. A lot of times I don't control myself, which I've been having problems with.
And this wasn't a one-off. The year before that, during the Eurobasket 2022 quarterfinal, he once again lost his composure. There he had major issues with officiating, received a technical foul, fouled out, and Poland shockingly eliminated Slovenia in the quarterfinals. Basically, for 2 consecutive years in the most important international games of his recent career, Luka's lack of composure directly impacted the outcome, not just for himself, but for his entire country. And that hits even harder knowing how much national pride he carries. He said it multiple times, winning for Slovenia means more than any stat line, individual achievement, or club title. And yet, in the biggest moments, he couldn't hold it together. And the worst part is that he honestly believes there was some kind of a conspiracy from these FIBA heads to get him knocked out of the tournament. Not only has he signaled towards them the money symbol, but has openly cursed them out too.
He was angry at the officials and he went over to half court. The free throws are going on. He comes down and curses out the Secretary General in Spanish. The idea that they would not want Luka Doncic and Slovenia advancing, it's a preposterous conspiracy.
Now, to understand where it all started, you've got to go all the way back to Madrid. Luka joined Real Madrid at 13 years old. That's where his basketball education began. But Real Madrid isn't just about basketball, it's a culture. It's a way of playing winning basketball with lots of flair, but complaining is synonymous with it too. For example, in the EuroLeague, Real Madrid players have a reputation. Club legends like Rudy Fernandez, Sergio Llull, Felipe Reyes, all great players, but also known for flopping, baiting refs, and constant complaining. I'm not a Madrid hater, but it's just something you cannot dispute, and as I said, it goes beyond basketball. Watch a Real Madrid football game and see how their players surround refs after every whistle. It's just a part of their identity. So imagine being a teenager developing within that system, watching those EuroLeague greats win, argue, and win again. You don't just learn the game, you also learn the behavior that you assume is an integral part of winning. That's what Luka grew up with, and it's baked into his approach to the game. Of course, there was hope that joining the Lakers would ignite a fresh start for Luka, a chance to mature, reset his habits, and step fully into the role of a franchise leader. But so far, that change hasn't materialized. In fact, this very issue was one of the supposed underlying reasons Dallas decided to move on from him. Now let's be clear, trading Luka Doncic will probably go down as the worst front office decision in modern NBA history. Not just because you never trade a generational talent, but also because of the return package. Still, the fact that the Mavericks even considered such a move speaks volumes.
I did know that Luka was important to the fan base. I didn't quite know it to what level.
Look, here's where the real problem lies. If this was just about Luka himself, maybe you could live with it. But when your best player sets the tone by constantly deflecting blame, arguing, and getting distracted, that mentality trickles down. I believe it creates an unhealthy atmosphere, a losing mindset where accountability fades. Imagine if a role player behaved like Luka, throwing up hands at every whistle, storming off in frustration, or disengaging during key moments. Most coaches wouldn't tolerate it. That player would be labeled as a problem, someone to move on from. But because Luka is so gifted, teams are forced to tolerate behavior they wouldn't accept from anyone else. And that double standard becomes dangerous. I say that because you can't preach accountability to the rest of the roster when your star doesn't model it. I just don't believe you can build a championship culture around a guy who hasn't yet learned how to lead with composure. Luka's talent puts him in rare company, but until he confronts this side of himself, his ceiling as a leader remains just as much a question mark as his defense.
Luka Doncic is the worst defensive star that we've seen in the modern era of basketball.
And maybe that's the most frustrating part, because Luka can be that guy. He has everything else: the skill, the IQ, the killer instinct, and the flair. When he's locked in, there are few players more dominant or entertaining. But leadership in the NBA isn't just about what you do when the ball is in your hands and things are going great. It's about what you communicate when things go wrong. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that Luka has to be a robot and passion is bad. But there's a line, and for 3 years straight, Luka has crossed it at the worst possible times. Can Luka break this habit and become a true Lakers leader for the next decade? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, also hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe for more NBA takes through an overseas lens.